Hello, YouTube. Welcome back. It's me, your humble narrator and host, Logan Albright, here to talk yet again about another book in a series that I've been, kind of raving about over the course of several videos in this series, the Penguin Sci-Fi Classics, specifically this collection of British-bound Penguin Sci-Fi Classics with these beautiful purple, mauve, and white covers with these minimalist illustrations on them. I'm in love with this series, and I've been raving about many of the volumes in it. And today is sadly my last entry in this series for a little while because I'm out of Penguin Sci-Fi Classics to read because I don't live in Britain, and they're hard to come by here in America. So I'm planning a trip back to Britain later this year, and hopefully I'll get some more. But this is my last one for a little while, and the one I'm talking about today is the Ark Sakura by Kobo Abe. It's a Japanese author, an apparently very celebrated and prolific Japanese author who I've never heard of. In fact, I think this is the first novel written in Japanese and translated into English that I read, so that's an interesting experience for me because I typically don't read novels originally published in Asia. No particular reason, just not something I've ever gotten around to doing. So that was interesting. The book was published in 1984, and it concerns a character who goes by the name Mole or Pig, usually Mole, as a nickname. We never learn his real name. And he is basically a doomsday prepper who has managed to secure residence in this giant series of underground bunkers and tunnels that he is kind of preparing as what he calls an ark for the end of civilization, for when nuclear war comes, and he's trying to select people to join him in the ark and restart civilization. He's a kind of somewhat overweight, misanthropic sort of fellow who doesn't really have much use for other human beings and seems a little bit lonely and sad of a character. And the story involves him kind of accidentally ending up in this ark with three other people who he didn't really want to be there in the first place, but who managed to show up anyway. One of them is an insect dealer, and then the other two are like paid shills whose job it is to hype up products that no one really wants to buy. And they all kind of end up there, and they have to figure out how to live together in this thing. I think it's somewhat mislabeled as science fiction here. I don't really find much science in this fiction. It's, dealing with this threat of nuclear apocalypse to a certain extent, but apart from that, it really kind of reads like a play, just kind of a character drama, because you have these multiple characters all holed up in one small confined location with each other and talking to each other and dealing with each other, but there's not really much like technology or space exploration or aliens or any kind of scientific ideas that are out there that usually are the hallmarks of science fiction. So I find it a little bit odd that it was selected for this series. It's certainly an interesting book. It's definitely kind of falls on the side of humor and farce. The main character spends a good portion of the book with his legs stuck in a toilet, which is fairly funny, and some of the dialogue is quite comical, and it's the situations are fairly absurd and surrealist and also quite comical. So it's definitely written as sort of a satire and written as sort of a humorous book. Some of the humor kind of falls on the scatological side. There's a lot of talk about this. The whole plot kicks off by this main character's interest in this insect that eats its own feces, and that's kind of a kicking off point for a lot of the discussion of the story, and a lot of what they talk about involves scatological humor. So if you're not into that, you're not going to enjoy it much. And then the rest of it is sort of just the interplay between the different characters and how they, function together in this kind of ridiculous situation they've found themselves in. I have to say, of all the Penguin Sci-Fi Classics I've read, this is probably the one that has interested me least. I didn't find the characters to be particularly likable or sympathetic. I didn't find their situation to be all that interesting. I mean, not very much happens throughout the book. It's mainly just a series of conversations that happen on this underground thing. There's sort of a conspiracy theory angle to it, but it never really pays off all that satisfyingly. Nevertheless, I enjoyed it for the surrealism of it. I enjoyed it for the humor of it. I thought that it's sort of an inventive way of telling a story. My actual favorite thing about the book is the chapter titles. The chapter titles tend to just be like long-ish sentences from the chapters themselves. Instead of like a 2 or 3 word title, you'll have a 7 or 8 word title that's a sentence from the chapter taken out of context that makes for quite kind of funny chapter titles. The one that I liked best was called "The Watery Taste of Disappointment Grows as Familiar as Old Shoes." Like, that's a good chapter title. You got to give him that. So I enjoyed that. I thought it was fairly funny, but it really doesn't pay off that well in the end, and I didn't find the themes it was dealing with particularly engaging for me. Also, the characters, the dynamic between the characters is a little bit flat for me. Like there's one woman who's with them. There's just like three guys and one woman, and they're all kind of after the woman. And they treat her in a fairly, what I would describe as, disrespectful manner. I mean, it's all about like who gets to be with the woman, and there's not a lot of agency put on her in that. And so I'm not offended by that sort of thing, but it's also not my favorite style of writing. And I didn't think that she was a particularly well drawn or complex character. She feels like one of those anime girls, who's just there to kind of giggle and be provocative and doesn't really have much to offer to the conversation, which I found, is not what my favorite thing is. I like her to be more substantive as a character, and I like all of them to be more substantive as a character for that regard. I just, didn't really respond to the characters that well. And, it's clearly a product of its time in the 80s and all that, so I don't want to harp on about that. But a lot of people I saw mentioning that in reviews of the book and being really offended by the way that the woman is treated. And if that's something that bothers you, you should know that that's kind of the aesthetic that we're dealing with here. It's sort of that, Japanese anime way of characterizing females, which you may not like, or you may love. It's up to you. But I didn't particularly respond to it. What else is there to say about the Ark Sakura? I see on the back that some other reviewers have compared it to Poe and Kafka. I definitely see the Kafka comparison. It really is kind of this, sort of sad, almost nihilistic absurdity of life that's being pointed out here. And like the whole thrust of the book is like this guy's desire to survive, and he's desperate to survive the nuclear attack. But like, what does he have to live for? Like, he doesn't have any loved ones. He's estranged from his father and his family. He doesn't do anything particularly interesting with his time. He doesn't really have any, he's not a creative person. He's not doing any great work that needs to be carried on for the good of mankind or society. He just wants to survive because survival is the thing to do. But like, there's no real reason for why he would want to survive. He doesn't really have anything to live for. So there's a kind of, pathos in that and a little bit of tragedy in that. And I think that's part of the point the book is trying to make is, life is worth as much as you make of it. And if you're not going to do anything with your life apart from sit in an underground bunker by yourself and drink beer and eat chocolate, the value of your life in terms of surviving a nuclear attack may not be that important. There may be more other things that are more important, like going out and living your life, which I think is a very good message, a very good moral. I mean, it's particularly relevant to the times we're living in now, where people are afraid to go outside. I mean, not so much anymore, but for the last 2 years, people have been afraid to go outside because they are afraid of sickness instead of like realizing that you have a finite time on the earth and you better make the most of it and go out and live your lives. So I think that's a particularly resonant point that the author makes here, although obviously written in the 1980s. I imagine he was thinking more of like the Cold War and the threat of nuclear war, which was as much a larger threat back then. Although you get here again, we now have a nuclear power engaging in overt hostility in Europe. Not great, and you can see how this kind of application and relevance carries on into the present day. So I guess some of the themes he's playing with and some of the points he's making are a little bit timeless in that they continue to be relevant here about almost 40 years after the publication of this book. But again, overall, I didn't find the themes too interesting. I didn't find the characters too interesting. And the humor was okay, but it wasn't like laugh out loud funny most of the time. It was just sort of dry, witty. So I would say of all the Penguin sci-fi classics which I've read, which now appears to be 5, if I can trust my stack here, this would be my least favorite, although not a bad book by any stretch of the imagination. I don't want you to get the impression that I hated the book or anything like that. I just was a little bit let down compared to the other works of complete genius, which I have discovered in this series. I'm thinking mainly of Ice and the Hair Carpet Weavers. If you haven't seen my reviews of either of those two, I recommend checking them out because both of those books, Ice by Anna Kavan and the Hair Carpet Weavers by Andreas Eschbach, were both fantastic, like revelatory novels that are rocketing to the top of my favorites list of novels I've ever read. So just a little bit of a letdown in comparison with those other books that have been curated so expertly by the good editors at Penguin. So that's pretty much what I have to say about the Ark Sakura. A decent read, not really science fiction, somewhat funny, somewhat absurd. The other author that I would kind of compare it to a little bit is someone like Alfred Jarry, who sort of invented absurdism. But, if you're into that sort of thing, or if you're into Japanese culture, you might get a real kick out of it, because apparently from what I read on the back of the book and in other places, Kobo Abe is a very highly respected author in Japan, and his works have won awards and have been very celebrated. So if that's your bag, go for it. I won't stand in your way. But as for me, I will be looking for more Penguin sci-fi classics to read in the future on my next trip to Britain or anytime I can find them on the internet to order them. And hopefully I'll be able to come back and do some more with you. In the meantime, I'm reading other books, and I will be back next week with another book review. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You'll have to come back and find out on your own. Also, don't forget to check out my own book that I published, Conform or Be Cast Out, The Literal Demonization of Nonconformists, available wherever fine books are sold now. If you are a nonconformist and you want to be different from the crowd and you don't want to be persecuted for it, it's a good book for you to read. You should check it out. By me, Logan Albright. Until next time, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, click the like button, click the bell for notifications. Leave me a comment down below on what you thought of this book or other books I've reviewed or other books you'd like me to review, and I will respond to you, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.